Could we get to our places, please, and get started again? Pass it around. You just pass it to the next person, you give it to Lauren forgot to tell you about some of the groups that meet over at Hope and Coffee, and so I think she put some flyers back there, and you'll hear a little bit more about one of the groups when we do what we're going to do now. What I'd like you to do is to pass the microphone around and very briefly tell us who you are and who you're representing today. Oh, it's on. Really loud. Keep it away from your mouth.
My name is Michael Haspy, and I'm the Christian Education Superintendent here at Zion Lutheran Church.
His name is Michael Haspy, and he's our Christian Education Superintendent here. Pastor Cindy White, I serve this church, Zion Lutheran.
My name is Krista Brown-Lee. I am the Executive Director with Family Promise of Carbon County.
Kevin Duffy Guy, pastor of St. John United Church of Christ in town.
I'm Maureen Duffy Guy, the pastor of Trinity and St. Peter's United Church of Christ in Tower City in Orwin.
David Rowe, pastor at Jerusalem Lutheran in Schuylkill Haven.
I am Tanya Cartwright. I am the Director of Faith and Family Ministries at Jerusalem Lutheran in Schuylkill Haven.
I'm Rachel Kramer. I'm the church administrator at Jerusalem Lutheran in Schuylkill Haven.
I'm Gina Capel, the Center Director at Jerusalem Child Care Center in Schuylkill Haven.
And I'm with them.
And I just wanted to mention your center is celebrating its 50th anniversary, right? 50th, yes.
Hi, I'm Helen, and I'm a counselor at Clinical Outcomes Group in Pottsville.
I'm Annette, and I'm also a drug and alcohol counselor at Clinical Outcomes.
Claude Schock, I'm retired, but actually pastoring at St. Peter's in Tremont.
I'm Janet Klein. I'm also a retired pastor from the Barnesville area, and I represent Trinity here in Tamaqua.
I'm Josh Krenz. I'm the vicar at Trinity Lutheran Lehighton.
Hi, I'm Rick Clemson. I'm the pastor at American Primitive Methodist Church in Tamaqua.
I'm Susan Fetro. I'm a mental health counselor in Palmerton in private practice, and I do music in several churches in the area.
Hello, everybody. I'm Joe Gardiani. I work for St. Luke's, but I have a couple of constituent groups I represent today. I'm also serve on the board at Carbon-Monroe-Pike Drug and Alcohol Commission, and I'm a member of the parish council at Holy Rosary in Hazleton. We're trying to get a program started there as well.
Hi, I'm Jan Osborne, ordained minister in United Church of Christ and recently licensed psychologist in Pennsylvania.
Kevin Fruchtel, I'm the pastor at St. Mark's United Church of Christ in Cressona.
Hi, I'm Peggy. I'm part of Step Up Carbon from Carbon County.
Hi, I'm Natalie. I'm a concerned citizen, family member, and just looking to break stigma.
Hi, I'm Brittany Pastor. I work at Silver Pines Treatment Center, and I'm training for my CRS.
I'm Walt Briner. I am the pastor of St. John's Lutheran Church and United Church of Christ in Auburn.
My name is Ken McDowell. I'm the pastor of St. Paul's Summer Hill United Church of Christ in Auburn.
Kay Jones. I'm a commissioned minister of health in the United Church of Christ at St. John's in Orwigsburg, Pennsylvania. I'm also the chair of the Interfaith Health Network, which has a substantial number of people involved in an opioid coalition right now, working with grassroots groups and congregations across the board, all denominations. We do a lot of information sharing. We're doing some programs. We just did a lot with vets. So anybody who would be interested in actually meeting on a continuing basis on this issue with other churches and grassroots organizations, I'll put a sheet of paper in the back and you can sign up and I'll start emailing you.
My name is Mark Brooks, and I love to follow Kay Jones around to wherever she goes. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Alan Hoffa. I am the pastor at St. Joseph's Parish in Summit Hill for the entire Panther Valley. I also work with Rosemarie with the SUD group, and I'm also one of the facilitators of the Carbon County Homelessness Task Force.
I'm Renee Seifried. I'm a registered nurse for St. Luke's Community Health and also a diabetes educator.
I'm Carrie Quick. I'm the School and Community Coordinator for St. Luke's Community Health Department.
Hi, I'm Barry Heckman. I'm the educator and speaker for the Pennsylvanians Concerned About Alcohol Problems / Pennsylvania Drug and Alcohol Education Foundation. So what we do is, like I said earlier, we go to schools where we can, and we speak about substance abuse, not just alcohol, but all substances. And we have a number of programs there, from vaping to opioids to alcohol and so on. And we do the same thing at churches. So an example at a church would be we would do a workshop with the parents of teens, or we would do it with grandparents, or as I did last week with a women's group, who knows what they're going to do with it. But what we do is we just educate. And that's our prevention effort, and that's what I do. I'm in the prevention field.
Hello, I'm Elizabeth Blair, a follower of Jesus Christ, and he landed me here in Tamaqua to start a group called Celebrate Recovery, and I'm a ministry leader there, so to God be the glory for that one.
Hi, my name is Lori Brame. I'm actually an employee of St. Luke's, but I'm also affiliated with Celebrate Recovery over at Bethany Church.
Hi, I'm Melissa Maraflag. I am with New Life Assembly of God, but I'm also representing Hope and Coffee. And Lauren had forgot to mention the different support groups that meet over at Hope and Coffee. We are very, we love to have groups meeting here as a space, a comfortable, safe space. We have a mental health awareness support group that meets every other Thursday. We have a SMART recovery group, which is a recovery group for anyone who's in any kind of recovery. It doesn't have to be a specific like addiction or, and that is every Saturday. We actually close the shop down for that recovery meeting. And then every Monday there is a teen space. It's not necessarily a recovery group, but it's a group for teenagers who need a safe place to be able to talk, vent, because, teens need to talk. There's a lot of peer pressure, and they need that, and they need a safe place to be able to just get their emotions and feelings and everything out in the open. And we are starting a brand new group. We're not, but we're going to be hosting a brand new group, which I feel is probably going to be very beneficial. I'm not sure when it's starting because she just met with the woman who's going to be doing this yesterday. But it will be starting in the nearby future, and it's called Understanding Trauma. The woman who facilitated it is a trauma survivor herself, and she will be teaching, helping people to share and connect, and skill building, coping strategies. So if you've ever experienced, or if you know anyone who's ever experienced any kind of abuse or neglect, family violence, school violence, life-threatening accidents, community violence, mental illness, loss or separation from a loved one, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, because trauma can stem from many, many, many different things. This is one of the groups that I really believe is going to be beneficial for this community. That one will be Tuesdays in the evenings. I just don't know when it starts, but keep an eye on Hope and Coffee and we'll be able to let you know.
Okay, thank you. Now, what we just did is, for those of you that are not at your regular job today, you have proof that you were here, right? People can watch this and say, yep, in fact, they were there. This is the part in the program where you were supposed to hear from John and Tammy Sincavage. John and Tammy couldn't make it today, and last week at one of the St. Luke's many meetings that we attend, right, John said, I'd like you to talk a little bit about safer streets. And quite honestly, I was really, I was pleased that he asked me to do that. Back in the beginning, in the summer of 2016, I was part of a group of people who formed Step Up Tamaqua. And that was a group of people who just joined together because we had concerns about the growing drug issue here in Tamaqua. About the same time, John and Tammy formed Safer Streets for Tamaqua's Little Feet, a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to fighting the substance misuse crisis. Their concern was much more personal. On April the 2nd, 2016, they lost their daughter to a lethal dose of fentanyl. When Step Up began hosting informational meetings here in Tamaqua in June 2016, we were drawing about 40 to 50 people, but over time, that number has dwindled. It seems that some people have a very short attention span. That is, unless they've been directly affected. Safer Streets has grown from 2016 from 5 members to over 2,000 members participating in their various events. And here are a few of their accomplishments. They provided free prevention and awareness programs to schools, clubs, organizations in Schuylkill County and surrounding counties. They provided drug ID books to area police departments and first responders. They've worked with Raider Step Up, a high school club, which began basically as a support group for students facing drug issues. They've offered free certified recovery specialist training, which has helped those in recovery have a career helping others. They've conducted numerous community beautification projects. Partnering with the local Salvation Army, they've initiated the Giving Tree Project, which provides warm winter clothing for those in need. They've advocated for free Narcan training, and recently they got a grant for 260 units of Narcan. They gave some of it to the Tamaqua Police Department, whose members are being trained in how to use it. And they plan on additional community Narcan training sessions both in Tamaqua and in other communities. They've sponsored the annual Out of the Darkness Awareness and Remembrance Walk, which has grown from 300 participants its first year to well over 1,000 the last 2 years. John recently purchased a bus to provide transportation to numerous sober events and activities for those in recovery, many of them free of charge. But the most important thing I can tell you about Safer Streets is that they have helped to place over 400 people into detox programs and rehab beds. Tammy and John say their goal is simple: to not have another parent bury a child, and then to have to live that nightmare forever. Sometimes we forget the power of people, but as anthropologist Margaret Mead said, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. It is the only thing that ever has. Safer Streets is a wonderful example of a small group making a significant difference in its community and beyond. Again, it has been an honor to share this information about Safer Streets with you this morning. I gave you the full packet that they gave me, which I've tried to summarize for you. I do hope you take the time to read it because it is a very good group. They have it.
Everybody has one?
Right. Greg?
One of the things I always love about doing this training, the places I've done it, and doing other trainings that I get to do during the week, is I get to hear about awesome programs in different communities like Hope and Coffee. How lucky is it to have an organization like that right here? I wish we had more of it in the Lehigh Valley that were similar to it. We have some areas and some locations that do it. We have drop-in centers and things like that, but what a wonderful place to have as an opportunity. Safer Streets, what a wonderful group to have participating in an opportunity. I love that this training specifically, we've intentionally set it up so that you hear about the resources and the programs and what's available to you here. And that almost in a lot of ways is much more important than anything I could possibly say as we're discussing this issue. So I really appreciate all the organizations that have taken the time to come out and talk about what they do and how they can be part of the solution to this. So getting back to what we're doing, just a couple things. One, we'd like to send out a survey to you via the email address that you left, as well as the PowerPoint from earlier. If there's anybody who has an issue with your email address being shared with the group here, if you let Rosemarie know at lunchtime, she'll make sure she takes you off the list. Otherwise, we're just going to send you that. And that way you can also have contact information for each other to be a resource and help each other afterwards. But if you have an issue with that for whatever reason, just let Rosemarie know and she'll take you off the list for that. So sometimes the indicators of the substance use issue for us are not necessarily what you see in the individual in front of you. A large number of substance use issues present themselves as marriage and family problems and difficulties initially. And it comes out as conflict between the significant others in the relationship. It comes out with different violence issues in the family. Domestic violence among substance use is huge. Gambling problems, domestic violence issues and problems in the family is huge issues and problems for people. So we have to understand that we may see it when we go do visits at the hospital, that substance use was connected somehow to getting in the hospital. A large number of accidental falls for people and significantly for older adults are caused by substance use, specifically alcohol. There is a connection between hospitalization for falls and substance use. And we often ignore substance use issues in the older adult population. We tend to sometimes look at it, and some people look at it as, well, they're in a retirement community, how are they getting alcohol or other substances? It's there, it's easily accessible. Some of them allow it, and it's part of their social activities. We can't ignore older adults are actually the second largest group developing substance use issues and new ones. The biggest group is 13 to 25-year-olds in terms of when substance use problems tend to start. Older adults are the second group. Lots of grief loss, lots of struggles with losing their physical abilities as we get older as people. All sorts of things play into it. So we have to make sure we pay attention to it. And then, of course, when you see somebody who you wouldn't have expected involved in the criminal justice system, it's a pretty good connection that there's substance use involved. We also have to look at the fact that when a substance or other behavior that we become attached to becomes our primary means of functioning and dealing with life, it fits the Old Testament definition of an idol. And that substance, that behavior, that activity becomes our idol and where we attach our spirituality and faith to and our ritualistic practices to. And it replaces our healthy spirituality and our healthy connections to other places. There's a really helpful book. I can't remember the author. It's Peter something, I believe, but there is a whole book and workbook called Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. And there's actually a whole series of books around that. That I've seen a number of churches in our area use as a way to address the fact that you can be spiritual and have emotional health concerns and difficulties, and if you practice spirituality but don't deal with your emotional health, you're not going to really be healthy in your practice of spirituality. The book, I believe, has a video series connected to it, and it's a really good resource for small group settings to address the kind of interaction between spirituality and our emotional health. With that, the earlier we can intervene in the issue and the problem, the better the outcomes. The sooner we can see that there's a struggle starting and people are starting to have a difficulty with substance use and starting to get involved with it, whether it's the person who has the problem, the families, or the children in the families, the sooner we can get contact with them and build up protective factors, the less likely it is to have an impact. When we talk about recovery, there's a concept that William White talks about often called recovery capital. And basically it's that same idea of economic capital where, you know, we have a certain amount of money that we can spend on different things in our budget in our life from our work, and we have access to that capital and have to make choices about how to use it. Recovery capital is about what resources do I have in my life that I can spend or bring to bear on my recovery process. Things like community connections, groups, even economics, housing, transport, all those things play into it. What resources do I have that I can bring to bear on my recovery? The more resources that a person has available to them, the more likely it is that they're going to reach into that recovery space and stay there with that process of it. So we also have to pay attention is how do we address things with each person individually. I don't know why it tends to happen this way for us as a treatment provider, but we will often get calls from a mom calling about their son. I don't know what it is. Well, I have an idea from a family therapy perspective, but it is almost always a mom calling about their son, where they'll call, my person who does the screenings will start to think it's an adolescent under 18 when they're getting the call because they're saying, I'm calling about my child and my son. And it often happens when they say, how old is your son? We hear 35. Families get enmeshed and uniquely integrated in dealing with the issue. They can enable the process and continue it. They can feed it. They can starve it. There's a story out there called The Two Wolves that you may have seen or heard on the internet. Talks about a Native American grandfather talking to his grandchild, and that he tells him that there's a war going on inside of him between two wolves. One of them is anger, frustration, depression, anxiety, all those kinds of negative things in life. The other side is hope and joy and peace and love and all the other good things in life. And the grandson looks at the grandfather and says, which one will win? And the grandfather's response is, the one I feed. So we can feed addiction by our responses to it. If we continue to isolate, separate, disconnect people, we will feed addiction. If we connect and help people connect and feel less alone and part of something bigger than themselves in a healthy way, we're going to feed recovery. Families can have that same impact on everybody. We can feed it, an addiction, or as a family, we can help feed recovery on the other side of it. And it gets complicated. Some of the research that I've seen and read is that one person with a substance use problem impacts 10 other people's lives directly. And people are frustrated and upset. Think about the spouse of somebody who's addicted to alcohol or opiates. that person who's addicted is putting their time, their energy, their focus, their love, their care into obtaining, using, or recovering from using a substance. That doesn't leave time for their spouse to get positive attention in relationship and connection. And think about what it would feel like, and some of you may have experienced it, to sit in that spot looking at it going, they're choosing alcohol over me. Alcohol's more important to them than I am in the commitment and relation. Think about the kids experiencing that. Mom or dad promises once again that they'll be at their sporting event, and instead doesn't show up because they've been drinking or using a substance. Think about the stories that have been out there. Usually it happens with nonprofit sporting organizations where you hear about somebody who was a parent of one of the participants in the Little League or the Football League, who was also the parent who was managing the finances, and they get arrested for embezzling money. Oftentimes, that's substance use or gambling problems that are leading to that choice by them. And then that kid now shows up again to participate, and all the parents in the stands are going, that one is the kid of the person who did this to us and took the money from what we're experiencing. We cross lines when we have substance use issues. And it's not that the person doesn't care about their family. The problem is the substance became what they loved more than the people around them, because the substance takes control. And that's what we miss. We look at people oftentimes with substance use and think they remain in control of themselves, their actions, and their decisions. I have met so many people who have been in the legal system who never would have done what got them there in the absence of a substance. And I've gone into court in front of a judge and told the court, this person never would have been here without the substance in their life. And the likelihood of them doing this again, if they keep the substance out of their life and break up with the substance and their relationship with the substance, is very small. But we look at people, say, you got arrested for it, so it's a worse problem for you. We have to make sure we understand how complicated it is and how it impacts everybody. It impacts everybody around them. It's going to affect faith communities. If somebody who is in a position that's respected has a substance use issue, the community is going to start asking itself, what did we do wrong? How did we miss this? How did we not help? And it happens often because people are good, because the substance requires you to, are good at hiding it for long periods of time. We want to be connected. We're designed that way and meant to be that way. From a spiritual perspective, we're designed to have that connection and relationship with God, who is love, so that we can fill ourselves, and God's the only one who can fill that. But we look everywhere else to try to make it happen softer, quicker, easier, faster. We look for something else to fill that spot, to get that connection easier, quicker, and faster. I started monocracy counseling with a great friend of mine, Bruce Bowen, who unfortunately in December passed away from a heart attack suddenly. Bruce was like a brother to me. I was probably closer to him than I was to my actual biological brothers. And he's been a great loss for me. But we loved to be able to connect to things bigger than ourselves. And usually about this time of year, there were 8 times that we got together to take a trip to one of the most awesome worship services that happens on a Saturday in Pennsylvania ever. We'd get up really early, even though we knew it started at noon and we had a couple-hour drive to get there. We'd meet to get there really, really early because we were real excited about being there and connecting with the group of people we were going to be with that we knew we'd see around us when we got there. We took a lot of time to think about very intentionally what to wear and how to get dressed up in our best from head to toe to get there and participate. We'd sit around for a while waiting for the doors to open for us to get in and wait for our worship leaders to come out and lead us in all the chants and songs and music that we knew was going to happen and everybody knew the words to as part of it. If things went really, really wonderfully well, we walked out feeling great about life and everything that was going on. And occasionally, we'd walk out feeling somewhat contemplative about whether we were putting our time and energy in the right place or not and questioning who we were. Anybody know where we were going? Penn State football. Think about it. Penn State football, State College, becomes the third largest city in Pennsylvania on football game day. Playing a team that they were likely to crush last weekend, 106,000 people showed up. The game in 2 weeks at 7:30, when they have the whiteout against the team from that awful state, a couple states over, that we won't mention. 108,000 plus people are going to show up, all dressed in white, and it is going to be one of the most amazing things you've seen if you've ever watched or been there live, to see a whiteout game at Penn State. People love sports and connect to sports because they're trying to fill a spiritual need, be part of something bigger than themselves. People like me who don't walk out onto the football field or the baseball field talk about sports as we and us. We won. I didn't do anything. Well, if you talk to Bruce, we did do things because we drove the correct way, ate the right food, wore the right things in the right time. He was big on the karma of things working, and if we broke it, it was our fault they lost. But we all want to be connected to something bigger. Substance use tries to fill that need for people and hurts them and causes problems. If I only found meaning in life through Penn State football, it can be okay. I'm glad I'm not the only one who has those thoughts. But if that's the only place I find meaning and connection in life, where's that going to get me eventually? Disappointment, heartbreak, and not somewhere healthy. We find all sorts of unhealthy ways to connect and healthy ways to connect. And all of it is because we were meant as people to be attached and connected to other people. And we have to find healthy ways to do that versus the ways that cause us problems like substance use. So we have to understand how complicated and how many people and relationships get affected, because that's my focus. We have to be able to communicate and sustain concern, hope and caring. One of the biggest things we can provide as faith communities is hope for people and help them understand what one of our former presidents said in their National Recovery Day speech, and said, the miracle of recovery is possible and it could be you. Sometimes giving people that belief to hold on to is enough. Like I said, little steps. We don't have to fix it all. One person can't. One agency, one organization, one group can't fix everything. But we can be part of it with other people in the process. Find out about the community resources, which you're hearing about now, and there'll be more this afternoon that talk about what other resources are, because we need to know what's there so we can connect people with the other pieces that we can't provide entirely. Have a knowledge of 12-step programs. What do they look like? Programs like Celebrate Recovery. Programs like Refuge Recovery, Smart Recovery. People are going to need different things, different services, different things to connect with to get better. And then work through the values and attitudes piece of things and what our reactions are. We have to have discussions about it because we have things that happen where we all have an image of what somebody who is addicted is. And we have to be able to have discussions about what that looks like versus what really looks like. How do you know somebody has a problem or not? Not everybody who gambles is a problem gambler. Not everybody who drinks a drink of alcohol has an alcohol problem. So we have to look at the relationship between the person and substance, because that's what tells us what to do. And then we have to look at educating a caring congregation. This is a big push of mine. I'm working with a lot of people in ABCOPAD, which is American Baptist Churches of Pennsylvania and Delaware, to work to try to get our churches to be a healing place and spiritually and emotionally healthy places for people to come when they're hurt, broken, and struggling. We have to find ways to welcome and support people who have these issues and struggles. Celebrate Recovery, having groups come in, like was spoken about in the back, about that'll come to the church and speak about it. We don't even have to speak about it ourselves. I'll come out to your church at no charge and talk about this on a Sunday or somewhere else. Other groups will come out and do that as well. We have to find ways to just open the discussion. We were talking some about youth groups and the struggles with that. Some parents' reactions, we had this reaction in our church. There was Sunday school material we were going to use for the youth group that addressed sexual activity and sexual behavior from a biblical perspective and choices and those kinds of things. And a lot of the parents didn't want them using that curriculum, because if you talk about it, they're going to want to do it. Well, if you've ever met and talked to a 12 or 13-year-old, they're already thinking about it. They're already talking about it. Who are they going to get the information from? Do I want my 13-year-old daughter, which I have, who I've told, we can talk about her dating when she's Dr. Krause has cured cancer, and then we can talk about her having a date? And she gives me the look and reaction that only a 13-year-old girl could give you. We have more serious discussions. She knows I'm joking when I tell her that. But abstinence only works for 10% of kids you talk to about it. 10% will commit to it and stick to it. We have to have discussions about choices and options. Do we have to talk about that as an option? Absolutely. Abstinence is the answer to most of it. It will stop all the problems that come with it. I can 100% guarantee that you won't directly have problems with drugs or sexual activity if you choose not to engage in either one of them. Otherwise, I can't guarantee it 100% no matter what you do. Do we need to talk about that? Yes. Do we need to condemn people who don't follow that? No. We need to talk about choices and how to stay healthy as a person. So we have to look at prevention and how are we going to address this and look at this. So I want you to think about two questions. And I want you to first take a moment and think about when you hear addiction or addict, and don't overthink it because we've been talking about it, but what are the first images and pictures that pop into your head when you hear that? And then think about times and ways you've seen addiction have an impact on your own faith community. Does somebody have the microphone? What are the first things that pop into your head when you hear addict, addiction? What are the thoughts and images that pop in your head?
The first thing that pops into my head is broken families.
Yeah, broken families, it impacts families greatly. It leads to separations, divorce, other ways of the families being broken. And what's interesting is a lot of what we see as broken in the family is actually their attempt to function and survive the impact of the disease on their life. So we have to be careful because a lot of times people will judge and identify a dysfunctional family. And the way it's spelled, DYS, means that it's an attempt to function amidst the pain. That's really what dysfunction is in a family. It is an attempt to function in the pain, in the suffering. It looks from the outside unhealthy, broken, not working. But it is an attempt to try to work and function. Yes?
I can't ever get this image out of my mind. It's my buddy Mikey. So we used to go in junior high school, we used to go to St. Margaret's Parish for the Friday night dance. So this is back in the 70s, 60s actually. And he used to sniff glue and drink and smoke weed. And then he would pass out. And we would laugh at him when we would see him laying in the gutter because we thought it was hilarious. And Mikey died. Not then, he died 30 years later. He was in his addiction all that time, and finally it got the better of him. And so that's an image. I can't get that out of my head.
We do that, and that happens often. We will often see pictures of people drunk and passed out all over Facebook, Twitter, the internet. Colleges are notorious for that type of reaction. Well, I didn't think anything was wrong. They passed out all these times and then somebody dies from choking on their own vomit. All these things happen. We often forget that there's somewhere in most homes close to 500 chemicals that if you huff them, like you're talking about sniffing glue, will get you high. We often don't talk about the common stuff like that, and that's where a lot of kids start, is with that.
So along with this issue of addiction, one of my particular ministries also is to work with people with sexual addiction and pornography addiction. And the word that comes to mind with all of this is shame. You know, and in the church world, one of the things we're constantly doing is trying to remove that sense of shame and unworthiness of love from people's minds and hearts, and that shame is just so overwhelming no matter what the addiction is in that person's life. And so, with stigma, the world imposes even more shame along with the self-felt shame as well, and it's very hard for people.
Shame is a huge issue and stops us from change all the time because we think we can't make it. It's never going to be different. We beat ourselves up when we don't need to. The addiction field in general used to take a very confrontational approach to people and do things like make people wear diapers and a sign that said King Baby because we had to break them down to build them up again. It's ridiculous. If you've met people like is being talked about, we're already broken when we get there. We don't need to be broken more. We don't need to be told how wrong what we've done or what we're doing is. We know. We have that. We may argue and fight sometimes with it. But the shame of issues like pornography, which again, internet-wise, is becoming a bigger and bigger and bigger problem. That's a whole other day of training to address that. But it is a huge issue that we need to be paying attention to because it impacts families and relationships exactly the same way as other addictions do. It presents differently, but it impacts them the same way every other addiction does. People look at things like gambling and sexual addiction issues and look at, well, you're not taking a substance, you can just stop and not do that. That's not reality. It affects the dopamine in our brain exactly the same way as opiates do. And they get linked and connected, and all sorts of stuff happens around that. There's a biological piece to everything that happens.
Things that first come to mind are that not me, not my family. This happens to other people.
And that is very common in our reaction of it, especially when you look at teenagers. They know they could get a substance use problem by using substances, but because of where their brain is developmentally, they look at it and go, that happens to other people, not me. But we all think that. Not me. Not in my family, not in my situation. There's a book that Claudia Black wrote that is, it's titled something along those lines of, It Will Never Happen to Me, I believe is the correct title of it. She writes about codependency stuff, and part of that book is about people who grew up in addicted families often think, I'm never going to have this problem, I'm never going to have the addiction. And they wind up married to people who are addicted or developing addictions and substance use problems themselves, despite us saying, it's not going to happen in my family. Addiction doesn't care how much money you have, how awesome your family is, how spiritual you are. It's there to consume us and destroy us and won't be happy until it takes everything from us. And it doesn't care what we look like, what our backgrounds are. It happens everywhere.
The word that comes to mind for me when I think about addiction is that word compulsion. I buy the six-pack on the way home from work to watch the football game that night, and before I pull in the driveway, 3 of them are gone. It wasn't my intention, but compulsion drives addiction.
Compulsion is part of the diagnostic criteria and absolutely pushes it. And feeds it. It's that drive to do it, even though we know what happens with it. We have every intent to drive past the liquor store and not stop, yet we wind up there yet again. And that adds to the shame piece of things, and that thought of it is, I know what this is doing to me, yet I still go back and do it. Sounds kind of familiar. They talked about this kind of problem with compulsive behaviors 2,000 years ago in the biblical text. Paul talks about the thorn in his side, and as was mentioned earlier, talks about, I know what I want to do, but I do the things I don't want to do. We don't know what the thorn in his side is, but when you think about compulsion, what's the first thing Noah did when he got off the ark? He got drunk. The first thing he did, he was just saved because Noah's different than everybody else in his family was. And the first thing he does is get drunk when he gets off the ark.
Yeah, exactly.
Compulsion, attachment, all sorts of things happen to us that lead to this problem.
When I read that, I think of before I was in recovery, I always thought of an addict or someone in addiction that was in Philly on the streets with a brown paper bag, drunk as could be, laying on the sidewalks. When I learned about recovery and was facing it, I was so shocked that, like we've been saying here, is that it happens to everyone and anyone, and all walks of life. Doctors, lawyers, adolescents, mothers, ladies that are pregnant. I mean, when I walked into the Karen Foundation on a Sunday church service, I was just shocked that I actually had to bring my entire family because, like I said, I grew up in a Christian home and totally unaware of what really happens in the outside world. So I had to bring them all with me to have them see we lived in a bubble. But the denial and the generational curses as well. As I went through my recovery, you know, we talk about the sexual sin, the sexual addiction, the pornography. I'm learning through my recovery now how this has affected my life and through the generations, that I'm dealing with a deep root that I didn't even see that was there. So it is a huge, I mean, it's just unbelievable what gets unburied as you get well through this process and be set free from these things. So praise God.
And that tells us that part of our difficulty with addictions is other things going on in our life that we're not dealing with and addressing and looking at or talking about or working through. Addiction a lot of times covers all these other things that are happening. So as we remove the addiction and we put that in the light and start to recover, we start to realize all this other stuff that was happening, that's gone on, that's impacted us, that led to our relationship with the addiction.
And you know, too, like with the clergy, you don't hear a lot of it on the pulpit at all. Like, no, everybody's afraid to address the addiction or the sexual sin, the sexual addictions. You don't hear it. It's swept under the rug. And then we walk around with all this, like going back with shame, guilt, condemnation, fear. Yeah, if it was taught more in the churches, because if churches are hospitals, then whenever I'm coming in there with all my stuff that I'm too ashamed to talk about or feel judged, if a pastor can bring that into the sermons on a Sunday morning, because it's real life issues. Why are we just throwing scripture out and saying amen and walking out the door? Let's get down and dirty and real. Are you struggling with this? A lot of people are. You can have Christ in your life and still struggle with it, and then you're left with more guilt and condemnation because you are a believer who struggles with addiction, sexual sin, or whatever it is. You feel like you are judged, you aren't safe. And if the church isn't equipped to help each other, where does it come from? The pulpit. If the pastor isn't preaching it so that the church can take it in to help the people come in, then we're just labeled with, like, you know, the stigma even from the Christian community, too uptight, too judgmental. I don't like it there. I feel like this. I feel like that. Now, naturally, the devil will come in and say, you feel condemned no matter what. But if it's done in the right spirit, he places people along the path to help you along the way. But if you feel judged in the very place that you're supposed to feel the safest, in the church, what does that say?
And we just have to look around the room at the number of people here, and you can see that that's changing. Nobody's here because they don't see ways to address it and want to address it differently. And the So Help Me God study I referred to that was published around 2010 said the vast majority of faith communities talk about substance use issues from the pulpit once a year or less, that it's talked about in the messages being given. So what you're saying is, in this bigger study at the time, was identifying the same thing. If you're not aware, September of every year is National Recovery Month. What a better time, because it's being talked about everywhere. Community events are happening all over the place during that time. What better time as a faith community to spend several weeks talking about the issue? People probably have heard somewhere National Recovery Month. So it's set up for us to plan ahead to say we can focus on it then in those times. So we have to find times where we can focus naturally on the issue and talk about it. And there is something that, as faith leaders, wherever we have the opportunity to speak, our attitude, what we show people know. I've done a lot of work with men's ministry. I used to work with a group called the Lehigh Valley Men of Faith, and then it was United Men of Faith until they went away and merged with some other people. But one of the things that we always talked about is what's the man code in the church? When you walk in and look around, what does the church tell you? What does the worship music tell you? What does the decorations and the way the church is set up tell you is what's okay? Do you dress the way you're supposed to? Is your Bible big enough compared to everybody else's when you walk in? All those things are thoughts and things people pick up on quickly. It doesn't even have to be a written kind of code, but people see it when they walk into our faith communities. What materials and information do you have out for people? Do you have, most of us have defibrillators at our church. Do we have Narcan at our churches and our faith communities? It's free, it's accessible, the training's free and simple. And it will be available to reverse an overdose if somebody has one at church on a Sunday. That's happened. I can't say it's happened like over and over again or lots, but it has happened. I worked with some Presbyterian churches in New Jersey because one of my former employees is working with the Presbytery in New Jersey. And they talked about that at two of their churches. The churches had Narcan and revived somebody in the midst of an overdose. Little things like materials, what's available, where to get help and connection can make a huge difference for people. How have you seen addiction impact your faith community so far? I'm guessing all of them have had an impact or you wouldn't choose to be here. Hold on one second.
Hear the term addiction, there's not a vision of an addict. It's like, oh my God, not again. Because for many families, this is fourth generation. And a lot of people just want to run away in fear. And I think as pastors, we need to really be teaching people how to run toward and how to offer love and a welcome and a place to go and a place to be, because that's a dirty secret when you have addiction all those generations back. And children as well. Their vision isn't somebody on the street with a bag, that's mom or dad. It's a really huge issue in the United States that most people don't want to talk about, and that's every single substance that there is.
And I love the wording you're using about running towards. When I'm asked to preach on a Sunday and fill in for somebody, I often give a message around the return of the prodigal son story and ask, will we run towards the addict in the process of it? And use all the different parts of that story that we're used to hearing and look at it in a different way from, we've played all the parts at different times, every single one of them, each of us. And will we choose to be like the Father and run towards versus sit outside and point our fingers? And that's a choice. And we have to learn, and it's hard to do. There's days that I want to run away and not do my job because of dealing with substance use all the time, constantly. It's not easy to sit there in the midst of it and see some people get better, and no matter how long you've done the work, it never gets easy when somebody you've worked with dies, because people will die from addiction. Even in the best circumstances, with all the options and choices in front of them, our addictions are that powerful that even with all that, and it happens, and it doesn't hurt any less when it happens 25 years into your career than the first year. And it's there and part of the problems and struggles we have. So we do have to figure out, as people, how do we run towards people? There's an article that's out there that's called when my son overdosed, nobody brought me casseroles. It's written from the perspective of, when my wife had cancer, everybody was calling us, asking how we're doing, showing up with food. Our refrigerator was full, but when my son died of an overdose, there were no casseroles, no people at the front door, not a lot of people asking, how are you doing? For a lot of reasons. It's a really well done article in terms of somebody talking about their personal experience. So we have to look at how can we and how do we run to that place of acceptance and saying, I get it. You're not alone. It's not just you.
I think when you had mentioned about the Narcan at the service and stuff like that, that would shock a lot of people, because I think along with the stigma of who does it, it's where and when they do it, when and where they get high. And people look at it where, oh, they're not going to use before they come to a service. They're not going to use before they go see their kids. They're not going to use before a baseball game and stuff like that. So I think along with, who's doing it, it's this people think when and where is another problem, because they don't think it's going to happen there.
Right. When we are addicted and so attached to that substance, a big part of what happens in our reaction to things is that we think it's certain places, but addiction comes with us wherever we go. This is why just moving from one place to another doesn't fix addiction. If I moved you to a secure place on the moon that had no drugs, and you wanted to get high, you would figure out a way to do it even when you didn't have access to your substance. The relationship becomes so connected that you can't function without it. So I remember working early on in my career. I was doing an assessment with somebody in my office, and about 10 minutes into the assessment, she looked perfectly fine to me. Didn't look like anything was going on. Middle of the assessment, she reached into her purse, pulled out like one of the black gray top 35 millimeter film canisters, popped the top off and drank something out of it. And I'm just kind of sitting there going, what in the world just happened? I mean, because the last thing I was expecting was somebody to do something like that. And I asked her, I said, what's going on? She's like, if I drink that much alcohol every 15 minutes, I don't get sick. I took her blood alcohol level with a breathalyzer, and she was at a 0.4. 0.4 is surgical anesthesia. I could perform surgery on you at that blood alcohol level, and you wouldn't feel it. It's also a high risk of coma and death at that point. Immediately stopped everything and got her to a hospital. However, she looked like she was okay. Wasn't slurring her speech. I didn't smell anything. All the things I would typically look for, didn't see any of it. So it becomes so normal to us that we don't even think about it. With the way marijuana is being used now as edibles and vape pens and dab pens and all that kind of stuff, people will sit and smoke marijuana in the parking lot and then come into church because they think it enhances their spiritual connection. Because it's natural, it's going to be legal, recreational soon, and all sorts of things around why they think that's a different thing in terms of it. Some people will pull out and avoid church and faith communities because they're so ashamed of their behavior. So if somebody just disappears from church, it's likely not your preaching that did it. It's likely the fact that something else is going on in their life that led to them feeling like they're not good enough to be in church. I tell people all the time, perfect people don't need church. Broken, messed up people like me need church. Why do I need somebody and help if everything's working great? I mean, I'm a mess most of the time. Just ask my wife. She'll tell you everything that I do wrong and struggle with. We all have issues and struggles. And I would argue, like Gerald May would, that to be alive is to be addicted, and to be addicted is to be in need of grace. And that addicted person, he says, is all of us, because we all attach ourselves to something to try to get a feeling.
In faith communities, in addition to all the stuff we see in families and with people themselves, there's the other side of that too, which is when you discover that several of your leaders, either themselves are addicts or part of an addictive network, and the ill health that has bred in the congregational system and leadership,
Yes.
that's another whole dimension. And we can't put the whole congregation on the couch, so to speak, and do therapy, but that's a huge issue for leaders.
Yes.
That a lot of church conflict is bred, or church dysfunction, to use that word, is bred out of, other stuff.
Yes.
Which is right here.
Yeah, we take our addictions with us, and our behaviors are addictive in everything we do in different ways. We can be addicted to power. We can be addicted to anger. And if we're addicted to anger, what better way to feed my addiction to that feeling than to create conflict in the rest of the leadership in my congregation and church? We bring that with us and play out. Yeah, we play out our addictions in every group of people we're connected to. And our behaviors, our thoughts, the things that come with it that are unhealthy don't go away because we're sitting in church leadership or anywhere else in our life. They impact everything and everywhere we go and what we do. So one of the definitions, and the one I tend to like the best, is Gerald May's addiction, out of addiction and grace, just because I love the imagery of his addiction, his definition. Any compulsive habitual behavior that limits the freedom of human desire. It is caused by the attachment or nailing of desire to specific objects. I love the imagery of nailing for a lot of reasons, but if you've ever pulled a nail out of something, it still leaves a mark, and you don't forget that the nail was there. So we're constantly knowing that we were attached to this thing and that we could go back to it. Anything else that catches your attention or stands out in this specific definition? Yeah, we have deep human desires and needs that we're seeking to answer. So substance use is our attempt to answer that. Our addictions are our attempt to connect that desire. And I also love the freedom concept. We were meant to be free and not attached and not connected. Yet, just like the first stories in the biblical text in Genesis, we find things to attach ourselves to and connect to versus where we're meant to. Why am I forgetting the name of the book now? I'll remember it at some point. But Israel constantly, it was Book of Judges. The whole thing starts out with Israel did what was right in their own eyes, had all sorts of problems, cried out to God. God sent the judge to save them. They got saved, got better, they all praised God, and the next chapter starts out with Israel did what was right in their own eyes and got themselves into trouble, and then cried out to God, and God sent the judge to save them. Over and over again. That's this process. When things are going good, we tend to attach to whatever it is that's in front of us because it's quicker and easier than the work to connect and have our relationship with God. So we look for something else to fill that. This is ASAM's definition. Like I told you, it was written by physicians, so only they could write the definition that takes up 2 or 3 slides in a PowerPoint in order to fit it. Primary chronic disease of brain reward, motivation, memory, and circuitry. Dysfunction in the circuits lead to biological, psychological, social, and spiritual manifestations. That's my favorite part of the definition because the physicians in the medical field acknowledge the spiritual and the importance of it. You don't see that a lot in medical journals, but they included it because they know the importance of us all being spiritual beings and needing that part filled. Individual pathologically looking for reward or relief by the substances or other behaviors. Struggle to consistently abstain. This is where they use the term and talk about relapse. Is that it happens, it doesn't have to happen, but returning to what we were doing before isn't uncommon in human behavior. I mean, how many of us have gone on a diet and lost 10 pounds and then gained it back 2 weeks later? That would be considered a relapse into our old eating habits and behaviors. We all have changes that we make and then rotate backwards. It's not the end of things, it's a warning sign to tell us something's not working. Let's get back on track. We do that with all sorts of spiritual behaviors as well. We set up, do a good job working through our devotions, praying, reading, and then we have to get up early to go somewhere and we forget to do it. And then we wind up a week later going, I haven't done it in a week. We fall back and forth that way with all our behaviors. It's because we're people and we're not perfect with it. But if there's not treatment and recovery activities, it's progressive and results in death is the outcome. 12 steps put it in the long term, substance use leads to jails, institutions, and death is the way the 12-step program put it. Now, this is by another SAMHSA book on spiritual caregiving that's free from SAMHSA. If you look up that title from your slide online, you can get the document that focuses on spiritual caregiving for addicted people and their families. I like this definition because I love the terminology of psychic cave. Addiction's a psychic cave into which one withdraws and hides from the demands, expectations, and benefits of both the outside world and deep interior of the soul in its connection with God and with others. Isolate, separate. We're going to look this afternoon at a poem written by Portia Nelson called Autobiography in 5 Short Chapters. And it's going to talk about falling in a hole throughout the whole process of it. And we'll talk about that a little later. This is the quote I mentioned earlier, Gerald May. To be alive is to be addicted, and to be alive and addicted is to stand in need of grace. We need acceptance to be able to disconnect. So before we go to lunch, I want to show us So I'm going to play a short video, and when we come back from lunch, we're going to watch the longer one. But what I want to show now is a video called Nuggets, and I actually found this from my clinical supervisor who found it, and I always wish they did a second one. Why is that not? So this is a video about 5 minutes long that I think does a great job of showing us how and where we start with substances and attachment and where we end up as a result of it. Thoughts or reactions? I always wish that they did a second part to it, which showed recovery for the little bird and what happens on the other side. But I think it shows such a good way that, you know, I talked about the Philadelphia study and how people still look at people and say, you caused it, you created it. I have yet in 25 years to meet somebody who is addicted to something, who looks at me and says, when I was 5, I decided I was going to use so much of whatever it is or engage in so much of whatever it is that I developed a problem with it. I've heard all sorts of other things that they wanted to be at 5 years old. But not one person said, I want to use as many drugs, have as much sex, do this to create problems for myself in my life. You can see in the bird that it started out by just curiosity and what is this, then to the feeling that first happened. In the substance using population, you'll hear people talk about chasing the dragon, which is trying to get back to that first feeling you had the first time you picked up a substance. We're going to go to lunch. We're going to watch, after lunch, a video, and then we're going to actually talk about the other side. And we're going to talk about what are the signs and symptoms of recovery. How do you know that somebody's recovering, what it looks like, how they're making progress? So I think there's somebody who's going to come up to get us ready for lunch, and then we'll go to lunch.
Thank you, Greg. Just want to let everyone know, a few of you did note that you had some gluten allergies and nut allergies. So when you go for lunch in the other room, there is a small tray that says gluten-free on the cover. It's a smaller tray. So that is obviously, looks like real bread, but it's gluten-free bread. And then anyone who has a nut allergy, the two sides are nut allergy-free. So that's, I think, a couscous salad and a pasta salad. So any other questions about lunch, just let me know. And I'd like to turn it over to Father Hoffa for the prayer. And just one more reminder, if you don't want your name and contact information going out to the group, please let me know during this lunch hour, because I have this survey and information ready to go to this group today. Thank you.
Bow our heads in prayer. Father in heaven, we thank you for this incredible day in which you give us so much to nourish our minds and our hearts and our souls. Continue to keep us open, especially as we are nourished with this food, which we ask your blessing upon, so that nourished in mind, body, and soul, we may continue to go out into the world and to be a blessing for others. And we make this prayer in Jesus' name. Amen.